Good morning. Welcome to the February 22nd Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. We have a very short agenda today. I'd like to welcome a lot of people. I'm going to go around and introduce our commission members. We have Joe Gardner to my far left. We have Terry Marshall. We have Bill Sim, our newest fashion plate, Jared, and George Sheets to my right. Today we're missing Tom Menser. Again, he was not able to make our last meeting. Tom's had a little illness, and he was in the hospital last week. He's home today, and there'll probably be more discussion about that as time goes on. Just give some hearty thoughts and warm wishes to Tom. Tom's been a friend of mine for years and years and years, and I miss him up here. And I think we all do at the city, too. So just keep that in mind for the moment. With that, let's just get right into the agenda. Our first and our only agenda item, other than the another update for Deepwell, is a condominium project on North Cortez. And I think what we're doing here today is looking at the not approving condominiums, but we're approving the layout, the site plan.
Somewhat, yes, sir.
Correct?
Yes, sir. So one of the things that are required in most states, and Arizona including, for creation of a condominium is actually a subdivision plat. So what you're looking at today is a subdivision plat that's contained within an existing building. In fact, this building was built in 1893, 94. Has had a number of commercial uses and residential uses. It had a hotel use in it, and at the time that it was a hotel, hotels were long-term stays. It was more of what we would call an apartment today. The building has had pretty much continuous use through all of those years as something. The last full use of the building was generally a commercial use. In this particular case, though, the proposal is to split the building into 6 condominium units plus some common areas. The common areas are the actual building structure, the walls, the utilities, parts of the basement, those areas that are common service to the rest of the building. And then the remainder will be divided into 6 residential units and 2 commercial units that will be available for ownership. So the 2 commercial units are at street level at the front. Those would be accessible directly off of the street. So customers come in, the unit splits. You have one on either side, north and south, as you come in the main doors. The remainder of the building would be 6 residential units, with one of the first floor units actually being a 2-story condominium with internal access up to the 2nd floor. And the remainder being single-floor units on the floors from the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. Most of the technical details are related to the design, the layout, and the legal descriptions, all of which are attached to the somewhat reduced size plat that you have. All of those have been checked against the requirements of state law for verification, and this plat is ready for recommendation and would then proceed to the City Council for adoption of the plat, and then recordation, which would actually create the sellable units at that point. Unfortunately, the property owner could not be here this morning, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have relating to the process or the plat or the design. Thank you.
A little background here. By the way, apologize. We have quite an audience here today. We have Councilman Jim Lamerson, who's been our liaison for several years. Glad to see you here, Jim. We have former Mayor Harry Oberg attending our meeting, and we have Phil Good, a former member of the Planning Commission, in the audience. So this is an august body. Although government officials outweigh the public here today, I think. We have a lot of them. But thank you, gentlemen, for paying attention to this. This is a great process, and I'm glad that you're here to partake and take it back to council for what you hear here. I'm a little bit familiar with this building. It used to be the several things, as George mentioned. It was the racket club and exercise territorial courthouse is what they called it. because of the racquetball courts, and one of the reasons that that one unit is two-story is that in that building, a couple places, they took the ceilings out for racquetball courts. So I think they thought it was going to be forever a racquetball court, but they took the ceilings out for that, and I think that's why this plan here is what it is. But I want to make sure that, George, and correct me if I'm wrong, all we're really approving is like we would for a subdivision, basically the lots.
It's almost a technicality at this point. In a normal subdivision, you would be looking at the size of the lots and compliance with the requirements of the zoning for that particular area and general layout of streets. Because all of this is contained in an existing building, there's really none of that that's part of the review process. The interior walls will be adjusted to make the unit sizes as they're shown on the plat, but beyond that, there really isn't much that comes into play from our land development code. It becomes more of simply making sure the legal descriptions are absolutely correct. And that's been done as part of our review process.
And on a project like this, I know one of the commissioners, I don't want to take your thunder, but but I am. One of the real issues here for a lot of people would be parking. And I'm pretty confident that parking's, again, not part of the purview here today, in that this is a downtown project. It has a couple parking spaces.
It does have some parking spaces. Its already existing condition alleviates the requirement for parking because the building predates 1968, I believe is what the code calls. So anything prior to that in the downtown business district wouldn't be required to have on-site parking. There's a lot of parking available nearby. Condominium units, generally, those folks are going to want to have a place to park their car, a regular place to park their car. So that's something that the property owner will have to figure out as part of their subdivision plat. Doesn't necessarily require we attempt to impose typical commercial regulations for parking on something that's not typical.
And this does not qualify for the, and I'm not familiar with the details of the process, but we have an in lieu fee for parking?
It could qualify for that, but I believe what will happen is because of the age of the building, it won't require the parking. It'll be up to the property owner to find parking for the residents.
Okay. You know, I think with that, I'm just going to open it up to the fellow commissioners. And let me start, Joe, with you. If you have any concerns, questions, comments.
No, seems pretty straightforward.
I don't. I think it's a great project downtown.
And did George answer your question about parking?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, before you go on, one thing that we've failed to mention is that for the last 17 years, 15 years, the city's general plans over that time have encouraged combining residential and commercial uses in the downtown, and this does pursue that end. We've seen a few of these happen in the downtown, but not that many. So this is encouraging to see another one. Success breeds success. So we hope this works, and that will potentially set up other buildings in the downtown that could make use of this process to provide some additional residential uses available through a condominium process or some other process.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Bill?
No, I had the same query regarding parking, and that's been addressed, so. No, that's good.
Thank you.
Jared?
Oh, no questions.
Good. George?
Well, it seems like 3 or 4 years ago, we saw this project and talked about the building and its uses or something. It seems very familiar that this has been in front of us before, you know.
There was a commercial proposal for this building several years ago, but I don't recall it coming here.
This is it.
It went somewhere where there was quite a detailed discussion about what the changes they wanted to make and the uses of the building to be residential rather than. But anyway, okay.
Yeah.
You know, either way, it's a good use of the building.
Okay, I think it's a great use of the building. I actually have my office is one door away from this project. They're on one side of the office restaurant. My office suite is on the other side of the office restaurant. Downtown's tough. It's not getting a lot of things for second stories. Offices are not really coming downtown very much anymore. Parking is always an issue. It's even gotten to be an issue for us. And I'm in a building that's a 30,000 square foot building, and it's probably it's not full. So we have a parking issue with parking spaces underneath. But our guests have a heck of a time. I had one cancel on me the other day because he drove around the block twice and couldn't find a space. So I think that finding other uses for our downtown properties is really an important thing for us in the future. Because otherwise, we're going to have all these, as it was for many, many years, most of the second stories of our downtown buildings, they closed them off, and they got tax benefits for tax reduction for having that space permanently closed off. So I love it. I think it's a great use downtown. I know if we can have people living downtown, we can keep the vibrancy of downtown and maybe even change the complexion of downtown to more consistent resident users rather than just some of the tourist things. So I'm all for this one. So without any further discussion, do we have a is there anybody here that would like to comment about this project?
I'll make a motion then.
Okay.
Move to recommend approval of PP 17-002, 130 North condominiums. It should be Cortez for condominiums.
Actually, I believe that's the name of the building, 130 North
That's
condominiums.
that's their name.
That's the name they're going to use on the building.
Second the motion?
We have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Sounds like it passes. George, anything you want to talk to us about other than,
At our last meeting, we had a number of absences, and we did a very brief update and offered up an opportunity for questions to be asked about the Deep Well project, because that was obviously a very large project that took a huge amount of this body's time in its review. Because of those absences, the chair asked we put it back on the agenda to allow opportunity for anyone who may have not had an opportunity then to ask questions of staff, to make comments, or to make requests for further information. We can certainly try to answer right now, but if something takes a little research, we will be able to reply back either to all of you individually or at our next meeting. So if there are specific questions that are left on the table, I'm open to try to answer those. I will give you a very brief recap of what I said last time, and that was the key part.
You can't give a brief recap.
I can actually. Time me. The one thing that I felt was most important to tell you at the last meeting regarding this was that almost all of the 21 points that you came up with as a body were incorporated either into the master plan by the Deep Well staff or incorporated into the development agreement by the Deep Well staff and our legal department. The one thing that was discussed fairly much here was related to a setback from Pioneer Parkway to the back of the building, a distance separation. They've proposed a modification of that. It wasn't a fixed number, and it was dependent on the types of uses and the size of the area, but even that one was partially incorporated. Most of the other things that you had concerns about were rolled into either the development agreement or the master plan book itself. So I think your efforts were effective in getting the message across to the Deep Well planners to address those things, and they did when it went to council. So
Thank you. I seem to recall on that issue, I know I was one that was championing more distance for the back of the center against 89A. Wasn't there some provision or some comment or thought in there that they had to come back to us, to the city, maybe not to the P&Z, when they do something in that area? Because we had issues with SIMPO and the state of Arizona with their control of those two roads, that intersection.
the roads and the intersections. So certain site plans, depending on the size of the structure, would trigger a re-review. That site plan review would come back to this body and then go to council. So it depends on what they put in there. there was a lot of discussion of a big box. Effectively, what they showed you on their drawings was the traditional shopping center, which just isn't happening anymore. What we would suspect from our planning staff here, what we suspect are they're going to have smaller buildings scattered throughout the area. They won't have this back of a giant shopping center. That seems unlikely, possible, but unlikely, given today's market and today's commercial economy. Generally, you're going to see somewhat smaller buildings. So we anticipate at some point a grocery store will go in there. That's a good possibility given the crossroads they're located at. Something like that would probably trigger that site plan approval, and you would see it back here.
Thank you. I can tell you one something that happened during this process, and it was very fatiguing process for, not so much for the commission, because that's what we do. We talk about stuff. It was lengthy, and the number of hours of preparation and meeting time was pretty significant. And I'm very proud to have been part of the body that looked at this project over the time. But one of the things, and I'd like to see us somehow address this internally in the future, I found also, because I had a project that was coming through the city just at the end of the Deep Well project, and I'm really pleased with what the outcome of the city's activity for this project. But I found that most of the staff had fatigue from reviewing that massive document in such a short period of time that I think it took some of our staff's attention, engineering especially, because it was a massive document that addressed so many more engineering issues. Initially, it came in with they wanted to have much more control over their engineering design and requirements. So our engineering department really had to put a lot of effort into it, as well as our planning, you and Tom and Darla and the whole staff here. And I think we got to be careful on these large projects that we don't drop everything else and just focus on these, because what happened was there's been a backlog of projects that are just now coming back out that could have been done in the process because we had so many people working on that, on the Deep Well projects. But I think our city did a great job on it. I think we did put a lot of effort into it. That may be a caveat that we want to look at in the future, so that the guy with the smaller project still gets his timing, because that's pretty important.
We tried not to prioritize by size of project, but in some cases, it
This
did
one was
take a lot of
very,
man-hours.
very intense. We had so many, certainly the councilmen were all addressed by the applicant, and so the attention just got diverted. I think we did a nice job. I think we did everything we could, but I think we have to be careful when we do have one that's a giant, that we make sure that the process still cleans up some of the other business that we have. So with that, do we have any other comments from the commissioners? Anybody in the public that'd like to say something today?
I got one thing. As I understand from having discussions with Dorn, that they have selected a rainwater harvesting solution for each lot up in that, what's called Antelope Hills, and it's just a small 100-gallon tank in their backyard, and they'll provide that to all customers, all new homes that are constructed. And then they're also offering for a cost each home a solar system with batteries and a plug-in electrical outlet in their garage. So it's kind of interesting how they're trying to evolve some of these energy and water conservation standards, and it's kind of a result of this project. So just comment on that.
And it's nice to see that from a city perspective. It's nice to see that our builders, at least, are providing some things like that for the future. And I think if we can encourage that as a city, we should be able to do that. Good. We have a taker, Mr. Lammers, Councilman Lammers.
Commissioner Maverick. Yeah, I want to thank the commission. You guys did take a lot of time. However, understanding the impact this project will have on our community forever. I mean, this isn't a one-time deal. And understanding the impact it's going to have on our roads, the impact it's going to have on our commerce, the impact it's going to have on this, and this. I would rather the commission take the time, vet everything out that we need to vet out, and move it forward rather than trying to rush it and get it out of here just to get it out of here. So you guys did a great job, and I want to thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's so good to hear that. Thank you.
had a question for George. That was one of my concerns when I was on the commission, was the setbacks at that intersection and the amount of right-of-way that would be ceded to the city for future expansion of the traffic volume at that intersection. You mentioned that there was some additional, cooperation with the planners. Can you be more specific about that?
What was offered was a site plan approval process and a determination of the appropriate depth of the setback at the time of a development project, rather than an arbitrary number, no offense to the number, but an arbitrary number that just required all construction to be a certain distance off of the roadway. Platting the ground to create the lots for that development would be the time when the city would acquire rights of ways if we anticipate additional widening of the roads adjacent. So again, if we add right of way and then need a buffer, having that 300 foot as a set number would have been used by both the additional right of way and the setback. In this case, widening the right of way and then requiring the setback through the process of site plan approval gives the city the flexibility to look at types of impacts. We also see a lot of new developments not having the traditional front and rear of the building. There's not an industrial looking back of a building with dumpster enclosures and ugly stuff at the backs of commercial buildings. So if they provided a site plan for a particular development that was within that area that didn't have the traditional back that was such a concern to the Planning Commission, that would be something that can be addressed in the site plan approval by the Commission. So they could have a three-sided building or some other arrangement that didn't put the back end against the major traffic.
So they are planning some flexibility in.
They've
at
agreed
least
to that
those-
flexibility.
Those parts that are going to be visible or adjacent to the roadways.
Yes.
Because I did end up looking at the SIMPO analysis, and it's quite dated. It was also assuming it was a retrospective looking at population growth based upon a number of years back, and not really anticipating the accelerated population growth that we're actually seeing. So I'm concerned that reference to that SIMPO analysis of traffic volume is not really going to be too valuable as this project goes forward and as the residents start to arrive.
That analysis concluded about a year before the housing market collapsed. So it is inaccurate as to its estimates of growth because of that.
Thank you.
Well, I understand that SIMPO is going to present to the council next week in the work study session, the 1 o'clock one, about the SIMPO road study addressing in that area some, so I don't know whether there's updates or not, but
I believe
is
they're
that right,
updates.
or?
I believe it's an update that they're presenting.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would assume, I don't recall the details in that plan. I looked at it during our process, but the growth was fairly high, wasn't it? Aren't we a slower growth now than that plan called for?
Not from the numbers I looked at.
I think we're about 2.5%.
We had a drop in a very flat period, and now it's picked back up again.
Yeah,
Right.
right now we're pretty low. I think it's about 2.5% growth.
Over the long term, we have consistently been about 2%
Yeah.
in growth, 50 years.
'Cause I think, if I recall correctly, we had just someplace around 400 housing permits issued last year.
It's getting up there.
And at 2.5, even at 2.5 people per household, that's 1,000 people. On 40,000, that's 2.5%, 2.25% growth. So I'm not startled by those numbers. That's pretty
No, I
generic.
think
But the
2.5
traffic is the issue. there.
2.5%, I think, is absorbable.
Yeah.
Doesn't have that much of a dramatic impact on congestion and traffic. Once we start growing faster than that, then that's where I get concerned.
Well, and I think that's a very important location because you don't have a lot of alternatives. 80, I use that. Terry Marshall uses that intersection every day, and it gets the lines at all the lights get deeper and deeper.
Yes.
Because a lot of that activity comes from outside of our community. A lot of people coming in from Prescott Valley to work in Prescott, people coming in from Chino Valley to work in Prescott. So it's long-range thinking, and, and I think our duty is, as a city is going to have to be to provide good transportation. That's probably the one thing that'll choke us in the long run, is having bad traffic situations.
Well, I know ADOT had a public forum on their traffic planning a couple of months ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, something like that, over at Prescott Valley. And their only proposal for that intersection was to increase the left turn lane going eastbound on 89A from 1 lane to 2. And that was the only thing that was addressed at that point. And I think
Going
that's
east?
well, heading towards Prescott Valley. So if
already
you're
two.
coming southbound on 89 from Chino Valley,
Right.
turning left, right now it's a
2.
yeah. But when you enter the on-ramp,
Oh.
it's a 2-lane that goes into 1.
Right.
So they're going to expand that to 2, and that's their long-term solution. So not real impressive.
Well, those are the issues. Those are, as societies move forward, you're always going to have something, and typically it's going to be congestion, traffic,
Yep.
schools, municipal things, but thank you.
Thank you.
George, I'd like to see maybe I don't know, my fellow commissioners, perhaps at some of our meetings, we could invite some of these other bodies to give us an update. As an example, SIMPO, having them come in and chat with us, not for any specific project, but just for the knowledge of the commissioners.
General information for the commission.
Yeah, and not just for us, but for the people who with insomnia that watch us. And I think it'd be a good education process. I view the planning commission as a filter for projects before it gets to council. Try to filter out some of the nonsense. Try to put in some of the good things. And it'd be great if we could educate ourselves with some of these things. Maybe we could make a list together and perhaps do that. That'd be sweet.
We will see what we can come up with, yes.
All right. With that, any other comments?
No, sir?
Mayor Oberg, thank you for your service to the city. I sure appreciate that. I assume you're bored now and coming back and can't keep your hands out of
I
the
also
till. huh?
hear, yeah.
With that terrible comment I've just made, thank you for being here. We're adjourned.